Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. And thank you for the ACBS Brazil chapter for hosting me. Thank you to Kat and Joe and Sylvia for inviting me and coordinating this event. And I'm just introduce myself in a second, but our focus for today is going to be on functional contextualism, which is the philosophy of science that underlies ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. So this is one of the main foundations of ACT. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a peer-reviewed ACT trainer with ACBS. Recently, also, I feel honored that the ACBS granted me fellowship, which I appreciate, and my hope is to continue to honor that fellowship by disseminating acceptance and commitment therapy and contextual behavioral science. I provide training events and individual consultation on contextual behavioral approaches. I have a psychotherapy practice in the United States, in two states in particular, California and Virginia. I consider myself to be a lifetime learner or a lifetime student with a value of kaizen, which is a Japanese word for continuous improvement. I'm always looking to improve upon what I do as a trainer, as a clinician, as a father, as a husband, as a brother, and as a friend. I do have implicit biases, uh, given that I'm a neurotypical US white cisgendered male. I'm about as privileged as you can get on the surface. Of course, I've had my share of suffering, but I do have these biases that I bring with me as a white male U.S. trainer and clinician. And I try to be mindful of how those biases can influence what I say, my perspective. But I do have an aim of building sociocultural sensitivity and promoting inclusivity among diverse viewpoints and populations. That's important to me. I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose here, and any pictures or that you see in this presentation are either original, cited, or considered to be fair use material. These are our three main learning objectives for our time together, which will be about 1 hour, roughly, to describe the philosophy of science known as functional contextualism, how it underlies and informs ACT, to explain the root metaphor of functional contextualism and its centrality in clinical applications, as well as the truth criterion and the importance of having goals up front, pre-analytic goals, which we'll talk about. So there are different ways that we can conceptualize or visualize ACT, or I should say the foundations of ACT. This is just one way where we have this very large body of knowledge called evolutionary science. That's the epistemology that functional contextualism is derived from. And then we have the philosophy of science, of functional contextualism. And then there's the applied science of contextual behavioral science. And of course, we are all part of that association. And then there's the theory of language and cognition, called relational frame theory. And finally, ACT is one application, one clinical application of all of that, right? And our main focus for today is on the philosophy of science. And and all of this can be seen as a contextualistic extension of behavior analysis. Okay, that's one way of looking at this. So I love this quote from Russ Harris, where ACT is like driving a car, and then evolutionary science, functional contextualism, relational frame theory are how the engine works. Now, we can drive a car well without knowing anything about the engine, just like we can make use of ACT exercises and metaphors and maybe even have effective results with some clients some of the time. In fact, we have randomized controlled trials that are designed around specific exercises or interventions shown to be effective. However, if we do know something about the engine, so if we know what's under the hood of ACT, we will be better equipped and prepared should our car break down. And I would tweak that to say when our car breaks down. Inevitably, we will all get stuck in our work with clients, individually, groups, couples. Challenges will come up. Being human is very unique, very nuanced. So challenges will show up where a standard or classic ACT intervention is not going to work. So the more we know about the engine, the better we're going to be able to navigate those challenges. We're just going to quickly touch upon the evolutionary science piece. This is the way that I have come to view the significance of the evolutionary science epistemology. So we can look to Darwinian principles or processes of variation, selection, and retention. So, an example that may be relatable to everybody is the pandemic, and specifically COVID, where up until the pandemic started, the word variant, in my experience, was not common in human language. It was rare that I heard someone use the word variant. But after the original Wuhan strain, we started tracking different variants of COVID that were coming out. So, in other words, that original strain, um, uh, uh, I should say, variations of that original strain made its way into the public, and those variants that were more infectious and transmissible exerted that function, the function of being transmissible and infectious, allowed those variants to be selected and then retained through spread, right? Through that's the retention through spread. Now that's the dark side, right, of evolution. But then there's the bright side. At the beginning, also at the beginning of the pandemic, and we can look at this behaviorally. Excuse me. Um, I had I was working with clients at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, and I noticed clients kind of splitting up into two general groups. There were those clients who wanted to kind of just wait out the storm, hoping the pandemic would quickly pass, and we know that didn't happen. And they did not change in their behaviors. They did not vary what they were doing in order to exercise, in order to socialize, in order to work. And they got stuck, right? And they got stuck in that space. But then I had another group of clients that quickly varied how they exercise, like YouTube yoga, how they socialize. We had a weekly Zoom call between my son and my mother so that they can maintain their connection, as I'm sure some of you did, and varied how we worked, right? And so those clients who were who more quickly were able to vary their behaviors, they adapted much more quickly to the pandemic because those behaviors that worked for them, that exerted a particular helpful function, were selected and then retained through practice and pattern, right? And so, in many ways, that's a lot of what we're doing in ACT. We're evoking variation in our clients' behaviors, ideally more flexible behaviors, including how they respond to their private events, to their thoughts and feelings, and then selecting and retaining those behaviors that are informed by their values and workable in a given context, situated in time, space, and person, right? I have called this principle by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved by the term of natural selection, Charles Darwin. All right. In many ways, we can look at ACT through this evolutionary lens. This is a lot of what we do. So, keeping in mind this larger sort of a background, now I'm going to invite us to take a look at these four main scientific worldviews that hold philosophical assumptions. These four worldviews were identified by Stephen Pepper in his book from 1942, which, by the way, all the references for this slide presentation for this webinar are listed on the very last slide of the slide deck. And there's a PDF version which all of you can get. If you haven't gotten it already, you can obtain that after the presentation. So Stephen Pepper, he looked at or identified many different worldviews and came up with these four, which he saw as relatively adequate for scientific purposes. So I should mention I am not a philosopher and I am not an expert in philosophy. Okay. There undoubtedly there are probably people on this call right now who know more about philosophy than I do. But I think I know enough to be able to speak to the relevance of these different views with respect to clinical applications and particularly ACT. So I'll do my best here. So we have mechanism or a mechanistic worldview where the root metaphor is seen as the machine. Like this is the main concept, the machine, where we can view the mind or the brain as a machine made up of parts. And our job, if we're taking a mechanistic approach, is to determine what parts are working and what parts are faulty, and then to somehow fix or replace the faulty parts, whether that's our thoughts or perhaps neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, if we're taking a kind of a more biological approach. The truth criterion in this approach is technically called predictive verification, or to verify with correspondence, meaning if I can verify that it's this part of the brain that's producing this thought, then that's true, right? Then I've successfully established that this is what matters in this approach. If I can verify that this thought I have matches with my life experiences or with some version of reality, then it's true, right? That's what matters in a mechanistic approach. There are different applications, including more traditional behaviorism. So if we look at more traditional behaviorism as kind of a linear cause-effect model, where, for instance, if the pigeon or the rat hits the lever and then they get food, that would be a more kind of mechanistic approach, this more linear input output. So then we can view the machine as sort of a processing mechanism that takes input and produces an output. So traditional behaviorism can be viewed as an application of this. Traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, especially cognitive restructuring, and then neuroscience as well. Then we have formism, or a formistic approach, where the root metaphor is similarity. We're interested in how things are similar and then how things are different. And how we, in categorizing these similarities, is our truth criterion. We have been successful if we've been able to categorize things based upon their similarity. And this can be seen in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, where diagnoses are based upon clusters of symptoms that fit together, right? And if these things fit together, that's the diagnosis, and that's what matters. That's our truth. We can also see this in different personality types. Oh, like I have this kind of personality, right? That's what fits because of my behaviors or, traits fit under that umbrella. And that's what matters. That would be a more formistic approach. And then we have organicism or an organistic approach, where the root metaphor is the living system or the organism, such as a human being or a plant or a tree or an animal. And we're interested in how these organisms develop over time, in how we work out inner conflicts, how we work out internal conflicts to form a cohesive whole, where the whole is seen as more than the sum of its parts. In other words, if you take seeds and soil and sunlight and water, these are all these parts. And then if you produce an apple tree that's producing apples, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. It includes those parts, but it's more than that, right? This would be an example of viewing this organicistically. Um, Once again, where the truth criterion is having coherence with the system, where things fit together very well to form a cohesive whole. We can see this in certain theoretical and other psychological applications, including Piaget's developmental stages to some degree, Gestalt, and other humanistic approaches like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And anytime we're looking at the organism as a whole being that develops and actualizes itself. And then, of course, also internal family systems, where we're looking at parts of self and trying to resolve conflicts within the system. And then finally, we have contextualism. And contextualism is actually derived from pragmatism, which is derived from evolutionary epistemology. So contextualism is a form of pragmatism, which we'll touch upon more in a little bit later. And it has as its root metaphor the act in context. And that is all one word. You'll notice the hyphens there, the act in context. It's inseparable. So it's how an organism interacts with its environment and how an organism affects the environment and how the environment affects the organism. It's all one event. And that event is situated historically and situationally, meaning that our history, our history, we carry our history with us, and any behavior we're engaging in the here and now is informed by that history. And it's also, in some ways, influencing our future. So this is an ongoing process of the act and context. And the truth criterion is successful working, successful working. When we have successfully accomplished a particular goal, when the act in context, our behavior in context has been successful in accomplishing a particular goal, we would say that's the truth. That is successful working. And there are different psychological applications, including a sociological approach, or even the study of history itself, where we're interested in context, a feministic approach, contextual behavioral science, of course, and then, from my limited understanding, interbehaviorism, which is very interested also in this acting context where it's all one. Okay, so um, time for a little quiz. So let's consider how these four worldviews would approach the following thought. So the thought is, I wish I was dead. That's the thought. I wish I was dead. So here's the first one. The, if we were to ask, what diagnostic category or personality type can account for this thought? Which of the four approaches, which of the four worldviews is that capturing? And if anyone knows English, if you're able to type it into English in the chat box, there it is, then I can see that as well. So thank you, Hendrik. You said formism. That's correct. This is a formistic approach. Correct. Let's do the next one. What inner developmental conflict is producing this thought? What approach might this be? What worldview is this informed by? Yes, an organistic or organicism approach. Yes. What in the brain or what faulty part in the brain is causing this thought? And is there evidence for this thought? Yes, you guys were quick to answer this one. This would be a more mechanistic approach. And then finally, what in the interaction between person and environment is giving rise to and maintaining this thought? What worldview is this informed by? Contextualism, yes. So this would be more of a contextualistic approach, yes. Very nice. Okay. So, functional contextualism, which is the philosophy of science of act, is derived from pragmatism, which has its roots in evolutionary epistemology. So pragmatism is a very pragmatic, we're interested in practical consequences. It's contextualism, but with a more pragmatic emphasis. Another way of viewing this is as a contextualistic extension of Skinner's radical behaviorism that was developed in the 1980s and proposed in the 1990s by Stephen Hayes and Anthony Biglin. And it has as its root metaphor the act in context, right? So how behavior functions in context, where behavior is anything an organism does, and from our viewpoint, that includes thinking and feeling, as well as overt behaviors. The context is very broad and very inclusive, and basically it encompasses everything everything other than the specific behavior that we are interested in. Everything else is context, okay? And then the function is the purpose and or effect of engaging in that behavior. That would be the function, okay? So here's a picture of me jumping up outside, right? So you can see me jumping in the air and I'm outside. That's the only context we have to work with, right? So you have the form of my behavior or the topography of my behavior, which is jumping outside. But you don't know why I'm jumping. You don't know the purpose of my jumping, right? Or what effect it's having. Could it be that I've just come across a grizzly bear? And this is an elicited fear response, right? Where I'm jumping up in the air with my mouth gaped open. If you ever encounter a grizzly bear, I have not. If you can help it, I probably would not recommend doing this because the grizzly bear probably would find this to be very enticing. However, this could be my response, right? So the function of my behavior in this context would be just an elicited scare response, right? It's very, very automatic. Or is it that I am taking a family photo where the photographer cued us to jump on her count? And the function was to have fun, or the purpose was to have fun while taking a family photo together, to bond and to have fun, right? Have fun. So this notice how this has a very different function given the different context. Okay? So the emphasis is on function over form. So let's take a form of behavior, such as cutting on one's forearm. Okay, that's the form of the behavior, cutting on one's forearm. That can have many different functions. In a context where a person is feeling neglected, the function might be to get attention. In a context where they're fused with the belief that I'm a bad person, the function might be to punish themselves. In a context where they cannot tolerate their emotions, they feel overwhelmed, the function may be to get relief from their emotions because we know that cutting releases endorphins. In a context where we're feeling numb, like not anything, the function might be to try to feel something, right? Almost the opposite of the one before. In a context where, and I've seen this in the past with adolescent clients, where they have cut on themselves because their friends were cutting on themselves. They did this to bond or to belong in a social group, right? Very different function. And finally, I had one client many years ago, a man who had carvings throughout his arm, not tattoos, but carvings that were self inflicted. But to him, he was creating body art. That was the function of his behavior. So notice how knowing the function can have a dramatic influence on how we as clinicians might intervene, right? It's not as simple as like just removing all sharp blades from one's possession or from the household. We need to know why this person's doing what they're doing so that we can intervene more effectively. Here's another example, but in this case, we have one function and many forms. So the function is to prevent harm, and we can prevent harm in all kinds of different ways. I have a rule in my house of no playing in the stairs. So I tell my sons, if they're horsing around, to please not play on the stairs. That's a rule to prevent harm. If we stop at pedestrian walkways while we're driving, that could be to prevent harm. Abiding by certain laws and ethics as a practitioner. Mentally rehearsing responses to catastrophic scenarios that our mind might come up with to prepare us and to prevent getting hurt. Restraining our feelings after we've been abused for expressing those feelings to prevent getting harmed. And finally, to refrain from dating after we've been intimately rejected. All different types of behaviors, but with a similar function. And then finally, we emphasize context over content. So, a question for you all. Are any emotions functionally negative or problematic? Right? Now, outside of our world, many people believe that some emotions are, like the emotions you see listed here, are negative or problematic. But that's not taking into account context, right? In a context where I am experiencing a physical or a social threat, could it be functionally indicated and useful to feel fear or anger? If there's a gap in the life that I have now and the life that I really desire to have, like a gap, it'd be normal, functionally appropriate, useful to feel sadness. If I've lost someone or maybe an anticipated loss, we could feel grief. If I'm acting incongruently with my values, not being the person that I want to be, it's natural to feel guilt. And the guilt can point us back to our values, right? And then finally, if I've done something that risks me being removed from a group, like a family or a group of friends, I might feel shame, right? And even that shame can be very informative and can help orient me back towards my values. So we have this emphasis on behavior, function, context. We have our root metaphor of the acting context, right? And then in functional contextualism, we also have a pre-analytic goal. The goal is to predict and influence behavior with precision, scope, and depth. It's pre-analytic in that it's predetermined. We need to have this goal because otherwise we're not able to assess truth. We're not able to determine if what we're doing is true. We need a goal to determine if what we're doing works. So in functional contextualism, we have this goal to predict and influence behavior with precision, scope, and depth, where precision can come from having very clearly defined concepts or principles or processes, if you will. Scope, our approach is broadly applicable, and depth, it coheres with other levels of scientific analysis. In other words, what we're doing is not incoherent with what a biological or evolutionary perspective might have, right? Okay. So, how do we predict and influence behavior? Well, there are many ways we can do this. And I want to first say this looks very linear, but in reality, it's much more circular, multidimensional, and multidirectional. All right. But for learning purposes, sometimes it's helpful to see it in this way. So we have antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, right? Where the antecedents are what precede the behavior. And this includes the current circumstances, the situation. This includes any relevant history, and then our private events, our thoughts and our feelings and our views of ourselves. Now, private events are technically behaviors from a functional contextual perspective. However, in ACT, we're often interested in how we relate or respond to our thoughts and feelings. If I'm feeling sad, what do I do? What's my response? What's my behavior? When this thought of I am a, horrible person comes up, how do I respond to that? So oftentimes we are looking at private events as antecedents. And as functional contextualists, that's up to us. We determine what behavior we want to target in any given moment. And then everything else becomes context. So behavior is what we do in the presence of these antecedents and due to a history of consequences. So, for example, let's say you walk over to your refrigerator later this evening and you see a piece of chocolate cake in there. And let's say that you have a history where when you have eaten chocolate cake, it's very tasty, it's very reinforcing. And later on, you're hungry, you see the chocolate cake in the refrigerator, and because of your consequential history, you're more likely to reach for that piece of cake again, right? And it will have certain consequences, certain effects. And that can include payoffs, such as the wonderful taste of the chocolate cake, and you're salivating and yummy, it tastes good as it's, going down your throat. You might get a little sugar rush from that. And then there may be costs. The costs usually come a little bit later, right? Either later that night or the next morning, etc., with a sugar hangover. You might feel tired or not as sharp. So in ACT, we're interested in both the payoffs and the costs because when a client is engaging in an unworkable behavior, a lot of our time might be spent in bringing attention or augmenting the functions of those costs. Like, kind of exploring that with the client. What is it costing them, especially over time, right? So, so this, oh, and I should also mention that human language complicates and enriches this entire process, right? So we are constantly relating to antecedents, behaviors, and consequences through language. But we can, as clinicians, we can strategically alter the context. We can alter the verbal meaning of antecedents and consequences to evoke new behaviors. So once again, for example, if we are verbally bringing attention to the costs of engaging in a behavior, in other words, if we're doing creative hopelessness, then that behavior becomes a little bit less appetitive. So eating the chocolate cake is not as appealing as it once was if we're noticing our blood sugar levels going up over time, we don't feel good the next day, etc., right? And we're doing this verbally. Similarly, we can bring attention to certain private events, like, when this thought comes up, and if you relate to the thought in this way as just a thought, right? Or if you're able to hold this feeling softly and kindly here for a moment, right? Or what does this feeling tell you that you care about, right? Connecting it with values, well, then those private events might not have as the aversive functions anymore, right? Given the way we verbally uh, talk about, the way we verbally approach those private events. Okay. So once again, the truth criterion in functional contextualism is successful working. So are we predicting and influencing behavior in a way that accomplishes a desired goal? Do the consequences reflect a successful action? And the goal can be anything, of course. But in ACT, of course, we have a particular pre-analytic goal, which we'll get to in a second. So this is important. We are not interested in the nature of reality. We're not interested in whether there is some absolute or predetermined reality. We are interested in our experience, our direct experience of interacting with the world, because that's all we really have is our direct experience of interacting with the world. And whether or not our experience effectively serves a particular purpose, right? That's the successful working. Does our experience effectively serve that purposes? This is called an ontological stance, right? We're not interested in the nature or whether our thoughts correspond with some predetermined reality. So, question for you all. Which is the true picture of this house? Which is the true picture of this house? How might you answer that question? You could put it in the chat if you like, or you can unmute yourself. Good answers. Anna and Ayla says it depends. Yes, of course, it depends. It depends upon, yes, it depends upon the purpose, right? Depends upon the purpose. What works given the goal? If the goal or if the purpose is to determine how we want to place furniture in the house, well, then the picture on the left is going to be the true picture. If the purpose is to find the house when we are walking or driving down the street, well, then the picture on the right is going to be the true picture, right? So we want to know the larger context and more specifically, the goal or the purpose, and then we know what will work. Okay. So in ACT, our pre-analytic goal is to enable mindful, values-based living, right? That's one way of conceptualizing it. So this pre-analytic goal is critical for determining if behavior is pragmatically true. All of us, if we are doing ACT congruently or consistently, we come in to the therapeutic relationship with this pre-analytic goal. We're interested in helping our clients to live more mindful, values-based lives, right? And if their behaviors, I should say, if the consequences of their behaviors reflect that, well, then that's true. That's true. So this goal also functions as an arbiter of psychologically inflexible processes. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you have a client who every time they feel, well, maybe not every time, but let's say when they feel anxious or stressed, they tell you that they like to go for a walk or a run to burn off that energy. And then they feel better. They don't feel as anxious or stressed anymore. And they also tell you that they have a value of living more healthfully, of being more fit, right? So is it, how might we assess this behavior. So, on one hand, we know that it's partially motivated by experiential avoidance. They're trying to get away from how they're feeling. However, it has a workable consequence in that it is aligned with their values. So, personally, I'm not going to necessarily try to undermine or target that behavior unless it is part of a much larger repertoire of experientially avoidant behavior. So if there's a big pattern here, well, then I'm going to target it. But if not, and it's working for them, it's aligned with their values, well, great. They get some relief from their anxiety and they're moving towards their values at the same time. So does that make sense? Okay, so the truth criterion in ACT is workability. Workability is really kind of another word for successful working, but in our case, we're using it to refer to how effective behavior is in moving one towards a meaningful and fulfilling life, which is another way of saying a mindful, values-based living. I see that as kind of just another way of saying that. We're not interested in viewing behavior as right, wrong, good, bad, or true or false, which that can lead to never-ending debates. Okay? So, and we have different workability tools in ACT, right? So that can make this sort of this assessment kind of simple in some ways. And that they include the matrix on the left and the choice point on the right. And some of you may be familiar with these instruments. Very quickly, in both of these models, a toward move is a workable move, a behavior aligned with one's values, moving in that direction. The away move is a little bit different in these two models. The away in the choice point, the red arrow, is away from values, is behavior that's not aligned with living a meaningful and fulfilling life. But in the matrix, an away move is experiential avoidance. Anything we do to get away from, to get relief from what we're thinking and feeling if it's unpleasant to us. However, even with the matrix, we can still assess the workability of those away moves because once again, some of those away moves might also be a toward move, might also be aligned with their values. Okay, like the example I gave a moment ago with the walking or running when anxious, if they also want to get healthy, right? That's important to them. Okay. So I'd like to take you through a very brief 2 to 3 minute experiential exercise here, just a guided reflection, a guided reflection. And as a way to discriminate workability for yourself, but through a felt sense, through a felt experience. Okay. So if you're willing, you can close your eyes. If you prefer, you can keep them open, but I would ask that you look downward so that you can bring your attention inward. Okay. And first, please bring to mind someone you deeply care about, someone who's alive today and you deeply care about them. And someone that you have interactions with, someone who you regularly interact with. And just picture their eyes for a moment. Imagine looking into their eyes for a moment and just kind of taking in their presence. And then reflect upon an interaction you had with them where you were being the person you long to be, the person you long to be. In other words, you are acting congruently with your values in the way you showed up in that interaction with them. And just notice what that feels like right now. Notice how that sits with you. Notice any sensations in your body as you reflect upon that interaction where you were showing up in a way that was aligned with your values. Now, reflect upon an interaction you had with them where you were not being the person you long to be. You were not acting aligned with your values. And notice what that feels like. Notice any change or shift in the sensations in your body. And finally, reflect upon any differences you experienced in that felt sense between these two reflections. And then you can open your eyes if they're not open yet, come back to the group, and if anyone is willing to share, either through chat or through unmuting yourself, what did you notice? What difference did you notice and how that felt in the more values aligned way versus the more incongruent way? What did you notice? There's no right or wrong answer here. Isadora says if the first one felt light and the next one felt heavy.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Good morning, at least here from Brazil. First thing, when I was noticing my actions aligned to my values, I felt it more in my chest, like a lighter, softer, warmer feeling. And when I was thinking about a time that I was not acting aligned to the person I want to be, I felt it more in my stomach or in my gut, like deep in my gut. But I noticed something strange that I don't know if it's my anxiety or my perfectionism, but when I thought about the times that I was acting as I want to be, my mind immediately went to when I'm not, and I started feeling guilty about it.
Yes. No, good
So I don't know
catch.
if anyone had that experience.
Oh, yes, good catch, Giovanna. It's that's I've seen that happen a lot, and it happens for me too. Whereas we are focusing on the workable behavior aligned with our values, that can even before I said anything or before I asked you to, that can bring up the times when we're not acting aligned with our values. Why? That's a frame of opposition, and our mind tends to do that. Like it will draw opposites attract. So it will draw the opposites. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable and opening up about that. Others, I see, Regina says, being congruent with my values makes me feel alive. Manuela says, in the first one, I felt satisfied and calm, and the second one, sad. Right. And if anyone wants to translate the other ones, you're welcome to for me, but you don't need to. I mean, as long
Do you
as.
want me to translate, Luke?
Sure, go ahead.
Just
So,
put it in.
Lucilia,
Let me just open the chat here.
go ahead.
So Lucilia Livesi discomfort, so she felt lightness and then it wasn't uncomfortable. Jardson said, I felt as if it were two people, like two people cohabiting, living inside the same body. And Haisa said, I also felt that.
I see. Interesting. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. Maybe noticing two different parts of you, right? Two different parts of a larger self. And even as I say that, two parts of a larger self, right? Even though from an act perspective, that self is context, that also has a little bit of an organistic flavor to it when I say parts of a larger self, right? So notice how we may have a primary worldview of contextualism, But we could dip into these other worldviews on occasion. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that as long as we know what we're doing, right? As long as we're aware of what we're doing and why. Otherwise, it can get confusing for us and the client if we're moving from one worldview to another all the time.
So here's another comment in the chat room.
Yes.
The first time my body was light, happy, and fluid. And the second, my body was tense. My mind was a cloudy, obscure, and heavy.
Wow. Very descriptive. And notice how we're using this, a lot of metaphorical language we're using, right, to describe our inner world, our inner experiences, right? Beautiful. Thank you. So I have one more thing to show you all, well, actually for us to do together as a group. And this is another little bit more workability practice. Um, but this time we're going to look at 5 different client statements. So you're working with someone and this is what they say. Now we have very, very minimal context to work with here, but based upon what you see, would you say this is workable or unworkable based upon what you see? Okay. The client says, I come home from work stressed out every evening, have a few drinks, and then I feel better. Not a big deal, though I am concerned about my recent liver tests. How would you code this? Is this workable or unworkable and why? And you could put it in the chat or you can unmute. Regina says unworkable. I think that's what she's saying. Anyone else? What is this person, what is this person hinting at that they care about? What is this person hinting at that they care about? Yes, Isadora says, right, they care about their health. Being healthy is a value. And does this behavior right? Exactly. It's unworkable. It's unworkable because number one, it's tied to emotional avoidance, but more importantly, it's it's not aligned with their values. It's not aligned with their values because they clearly care about their health here, right? Okay. Second one, even though I was dreading it, I made it to that event last week. It was nice to see some friends. Workable or unworkable? Workable from Regina. Anyone else? Yeah, feel free to take a guess. Workable because it seems aligned to the values. Yes, right. The person saying it was nice to see some friends. That is hinting at a value related to friendship. We don't know exactly what it is, but there's values in that. And even though they were dreading it, even though they had lots of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings showing up for them, their action resulted in a successful consequence, right, of connecting with their friends. So we would say this is workable. This is true from an act perspective. Next one. She's my sister, and I really do want to connect with her again, but not until she apologizes. She's my sister, and I really do want to connect with her again, but not until she apologizes. Workable or unworkable? Unworkable, unworkable. And why? Why is this one unworkable? How might you conceptualize this from an ACT perspective or a relational frame theory perspective? Anybody? And you're welcome to unmute. Why is this one unworkable? Giovanna says that's a tough one. Regina says interacting would be an opportunity for forgiveness. Ah, yes. Isadora, you nailed it. A rule that is not possible. It's this person is fused with a rule of the rule is we're not going to connect again until she apologizes. And it's a rule that's not within her control or his control, whoever their control. We don't know what the perspective is. So it's a rule that's not within the person's control. So it's a rule that they can't follow. They can't follow this rule. It's up to someone else to apologize. So this is unworkable. There's fusion with the rule that's getting in the way of their values. Okay, two more. Being with her is very different from others I've been with. It's not just sex. It really means something to me. It really means something to me. What do you guys think? Workable or unworkable? Yeah, this would be workable, right? Person saying this is, yes, intimacy as a value. Yes, very well said. Intimacy as a value, it's meaningful to them. Yes. Last one. Even though I enjoyed that job, I had to stop working there because of my obsessive thoughts. And this was from an actual client of mine recently. So even though I enjoyed that job, I had to stop working there because of my obsessive thoughts. What do you guys think? Unworkable, unworkable. Why? Why unworkable? Values, right? So they enjoyed the job, so there's something they enjoyed about it. But yes, it's avoidance based. It's avoidance based, exactly. I could not be with those obsessive thoughts. I cannot just allow those thoughts to be there. And I didn't know that this person had quit their job until a few weeks afterwards. He did not tell me that. Thankfully, we got him back into his job using combination of acceptance and diffusion and orienting to values. But yes, this would be an unworkable. Okay. So here's a final slide on key takeaways. We all come into the clinical context with a psychological frame derived from a worldview that holds philosophical assumptions. I know that's a mouthful, but we're all coming into the work with a particular worldview. In ACT, that viewpoint is based upon a root metaphor and a truth criterion, right? The acting context and workability. All behavior has a function when we look at that behavior in context. And the more context we know, the more we're better able to understand the function. And that includes historical, situational, intrapersonal, interpersonal, all of the above. That function selects the behavior. The function selects that behavior. That's why the behavior occurs. Therefore, no behavior is inherently bad, wrong, negative, or false, right? As functional contextualists, we seek to understand, predict, and influence behavior in more workable directions using principles and processes that offer precision, scope, and depth, right? That's our primary mission. So this is how to connect with me if you're interested. My website, my email. You can access. I have a training webpage on ACBS. I'm on social media, and I thank you for your spending your Saturday morning here with me. These are all the references from the presentation. And Joe has the slide deck, a PDF version that he can share with you if you'd like. And if you have any questions, I can stay for like 5 more minutes. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them.
So here in the chat, someone said it was very good, also very quick, but we thank you very much. Well, here's in English. Thank you very much. I love the way you teach.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. How was my pacing, Joe? Okay?
For me, it was fine. The pacing, it was good.
Okay.
So Juliana said, glad to be here this morning.
And I'll also mention if you're interested in doing a course or a workshop with me, I am preparing to do the second time I'll be doing interact with couples, and intimate partners. That course, which is through Praxis, is it okay if I share the link for that course in the chat box? Yes. Let me find it here real quick. So that course starts September 11th. I'm putting it in the chat box right now. If you're interested in working with couples, with intimate partners, or if you already do, and if you'd like to take an ACT approach to that work, I also integrate emotionally focused therapy a little bit. I integrate integrative behavioral couple therapy, and FAP, functional analytic psychotherapy. So that's integrated into this course, but it's primarily ACT based, and it centers around yearnings, looking at yearnings within intimate relationships, yearnings as drivers of our behavior, and we extend the ACT processes interpersonally. So it's a 6 week long course, 12 hours total, 2 hours a week every Thursday. So we're meeting on Thursdays. Your Brazil time would be 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Brazil time. Well, actually, that may not be true. Well, yes, that's true. Yes, that's true. Because our time change happens November 1st. So the course will be done by then. So yeah, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock Brazilian time, if you're interested. And if funds are an issue, please reach out to me, let me know, and we'll see if we can, help you out in that respect. Wagner says, since values are also verbal stimuli, clients sometimes end up relating to values as rules without a context. This happens to you too. How do you deal with it? Yes, that's true. We can relate to values in kind of a rule governed sort of way. Like, I need to pick up my kids every day. I need to be a better mom, or I need to be a better dad, or something like that. What I like to do is to uh, um, determine, basically, to see if we can take the rule out of the equation for a moment. So, like, I might ask something like, so you say you need to be a better dad. I might ask first, like, where did that rule come from? How did you derive that? Where did that come from? Like, kind of looking at the history of that. Also to ask, let's just say for a moment that you didn't have to be a better dad. No one was pressuring you to be a better dad. No one was expecting you to be a better dad. Even your kids, let's say, even if it didn't matter to them that you were a better dad, would it still be important to you? Would it still matter to you? Right? So there's ways we can kind of pull out the functions of the rule and try to get more at the heart of values. Anyone else? And thank you
Thank
for the
you.
positive feedback. Yeah, you're welcome, Wagner. Victor?
Hello, I'm sorry I can't turn my camera on, but here's my question. Every time I study contextual functionalism, people always present Stephen Pepper's ideas. Uh, are is his work connected directly with the contextual functionalism? Why is that connection so strong?
Yes, good question. My understanding is, so yes, it is connected, specifically and primarily through Stephen Hayes, who developed functional contextualism uh, in response to this contextualistic worldview that Stephen Pepper identified. Stephen Hayes was also very much influenced in the evolutionary epistemology as well. And that's where pragmatism comes in. And my understanding is that contextualism is a derivation of pragmatism. So Stephen Hayes, he just emphasized that pragmatic piece through of successful working and then ultimately workability and ACT. But yes, uh, functional contextualism is in part derived from Stephen Pepper's contextualism. It's also in part derived from behavior analysis. It's a contextualistic extension of Skinner's radical behaviorism. So you probably have to talk directly to Steve or ask Stephen Hayes, to get a more probably accurate answer. But that's my understanding.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
You're welcome. Yeah, there's a paper from like 1988, I believe, where where Stephen Hayes was developing functional contextualism, where it's all about Pepper's worldviews. Okay, well, I'm going to go eat breakfast. So I was
Café da...
fasting this morning, and I want to thank you for being here. It was my pleasure. Thank you for Sylvia for reaching out to me. And it was nice to be with you all here on this Saturday morning. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day today. I hope to meet you again in the future, maybe see you at the next World Conference, some of you in Lyon, France. I will be there. If you're there, please come up to me and say, "Hey, I remember you," and we can connect. All right. Take care.
Lu, muito obrigada.
Lu, thank you very much, Sylvia saying. Thank you, João, for the great translation. Thank you. It was great listening on this side. Everybody, we hope that this will be an incentive that will have more peer-reviewed act trainers. This was our main goal here, to have this first step, this start to where do I start? What do we talk about? So it's pretty much this. We're available in our channels, and thank you.
Yeah, and if there's a particular topic that you would like someone to present on, a peer review trainer present on, I can reach out directly to the peer review trainer community. We have our own listserv, and I can ask if someone would be willing to present on that topic for your chapter. So just let me know. How do I say thank you in Portuguese?
Obrigado.
Obrigado.
Amazing.
Right. Obrigado. Obrigado. Got it. Obrigado.
Só reforçar aqui os agradecimentos. Não sei se todo mundo entendeu um pouco do o porquê esse projeto existe, o que que a gente quer com aquilo, mas o SIGECT está muito interessado em ajudar a nossa comunidade, que é uma comunidade tão grande, tão forte, tão bem capacitada em ACT, da gente ter mais treinadores revisados por pares, que é esse Peer Reviewed ACT Trainers. Tem um processo que as etapas para passar por isso. A gente até fez a gente e o Raul, não sei se o Raul ainda estava aqui, ele participou da chamada, mas gravou tipo um videozinho no nosso Instagram explicando como que você se torna um Peer Reviewed Act Trainer. E uma das etapas é uma redação sobre contextualismo funcional. Tudo isso que o Lu falou pra gente hoje é meio que o que tem que aparecer nessa redação, e ele foi muito generoso em tirar esse momento, falar aqui de graça com a gente, uma referência internacional. Ele que, inclusive, era uma das pessoas que corrigia as redações, então tudo que ele trouxe é super valioso e a gente espera demais que isso possa servir de base para quem tiver interesse em participar desse processo, e mesmo quem não está muito afim de ser um treinador especificamente em ACT, mas é algo que embasa muito a nossa profissão, nossa atuação, nossa visão de mundo. E novamente agradecer aqui tanto quem estava, Silvia, Ramon, Rebeca, Márcio, Cat nessa parte técnica, mas também quem tirou um tempinho do sábado para assistir e estar aqui com a gente. Continue acompanhando o SIG e muito obrigado, pessoal.